Okay, so welcome everyone. So thank you for joining us to the afternoon lecture as part of the lecture series of on Dunhuang by the ISF Academy, the Chinese Research Center. So my name is Bill Mack. I'm the director of the Chinese Research Center here at ISF Academy. And we are very happy to have us today, Dr. Marco Caboara. And so a few words about Dr. Caboara. He's a senior lecturer in the history of cartography and history of science at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Prior to his current appointment, he was the head of the special collection at the Le Shau Kee Library of the same university. So today we have Marco to speak for us on the topic of mapping China and mapping the world. So before we start, let us just remind everyone, please have your mobile phone turned off. At the end of our lecture, which is about 50 minutes, we will have a Q&A session, so you're welcome to ask questions. And including those who are online with us, please feel free to drop your message and comments and questions in the box somewhere on the screen, and we'll try to pick up your question. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for having invited me and being here. And as I actually mentioned, you can even ask questions during the talk. Well, online it would be more difficult, but for the audience here, be welcome, because I will be talking about maps. Maps are something that is really very interactive, and at the same time also something that needs to be engaged with in a way that you can find what is interesting for you. So I'll try to guide you, but it's good also if I have some feedback from you when you feel lost, if you do. So basically I will be talking about three main topics. As Bill said, I was in charge of the map collection at UST, and the collection is a very unusual collection, unique not only in Hong Kong, but actually in East Asia. It's a collection of Western printed maps of China. And having to deal with this collection, finding out what is the significance, but also expanding the collection really helped me to shape everything else that I've been doing in the past 4 or 5 years. And also, that's the reason why then I moved to teach the history of cartography, that is the history of maps. So one thing that I will be dealing with is what are Western maps of China, and how did Westerners got engaged in mapping China, and how that actually connected to Chinese map makers making usage of Western maps and creating a new worldview, both in Europe and in China. Then I will be talking about the book I wrote that is it was in the previous slides. It's about every single map of China printed in Europe. And so it was a big project, and I will tell you more about this project and how it came about and how it could be expanded. And the last thing I will do, depending on time, if there is not enough time for certain things, then we can have it in the Q&A, will be talking about the map exhibition that is presently in UST. Basically as a final development of having a map collection, expanding the collection, studying the collection, then exhibiting the collection, and have the public really see this map, interact with these maps. Because they are all online, but it's very different if you see them and if you see the originals in front of you. Now, I think, thanks to Bill, I can almost skip the self-introduction. I just want to mention here, I'm from Genova, so that's one of the Italian cities that was involved in exploration with Columbus. At the same time, Marco Polo wrote his travels in Genova while in prison, being an enemy of Venice. He was there. And I remember growing up in Genova and seeing the plaque in the center saying, oh, Marco Polo was in jail here and he wrote his account here. It's the 700 years of the death of Marco Polo this year. So there will be celebrations. I'm actually even teaching a course about it. For the rest, in the past I did classical Chinese, and then basically I kind of fell in love with maps. I mean, it's really like something that makes you very engaged and something that can be used to talk about so many things, especially history, but actually about contact is a way to visualize things that otherwise are not very clear, and also a way to tell stories, to tell many stories. Now, the special collection, as it was when I basically got in charge of it 7 years ago, a collection of Western printed maps of China, mostly. It was created almost 30 years ago by the first head of the library. And at that time, UST was really like being created from scratch. There were no special collection. Often the collection comes from an alumnus or a rich person giving you something. In this case, the library bought them one by one. And there was a plan. The plan was to basically connect science, which is the main purpose of UST, with humanities through maps, through unique cultural objects. And initially, the focus was on European cartographers. And I will show you some of these maps so you get a feeling of these maps. And it also get a feeling that the collection was not only built with the idea of having maps of China as such, but maps that put China in the world, okay? So this is a map of the world, 1493, just 1 year after Columbus discovered America, but you would not tell it from this map. Do you see the arrow that I move, or I need to instead of point it? Can you see the arrow here? Well, vaguely. So this is called Serica. This area, Serica, it's a Latin name that means land of silk. That was the old name for China. So in the this map is printed in 1493, but goes back to much beyond that. It basically goes back to this vision, the world of Ptolemy, the knowledge about cartography that was created in ancient Rome and Greece 2,000 years ago. And for them, the world was really much smaller than it is for now, for us now. The Greeks had an idea of a spherical Earth, and they knew there was a globe, but they only were interested in the area that they call ecumene, where people lived and they knew about. And the area that people lived and knew about is this yellow area that is basically northern part of Africa, all of Europe, basically all of Europe, and then half of Asia, really. And so when you see this, you see that the world is consists of 3 parts, the green Europe here. These maps are printed. They're printed black and white, but they are hand-colored, each one in a different color. The sample we have here is green, this kind of brownish for Africa, and this pale pink for Asia. And it's even connected with biblical history, because here we have Japheth, Sem, and Cam, the 3 sons of Noah, that after the flood populated the 3 parts of the world. So it was a very compact work, but everything had its own place. At the same time, it was a globe that was starting to expand. And basically, this expansion is given by this other map. We call it a map. It's a 3-dimensional object. It's a globe. It's a globe created in Nuremberg in 1492, basically same year, just 1 year before the other map. And this globe is the globe that Columbus used, or a similar view of the world that Columbus used to plan his trip from Spain to Asia, because the globe is basically just a 3D rendering of the image you saw before. I mean, there is really just Africa, Europe, and some part of Asia. For Ptolemy, it was much smaller than we now know to be. So this part, and at the same time, based on specific calculation, the cartographer behind decided that the separation between, in the globe, Europe and Asia on one side here, was actually not very long. Okay, so when Columbus sailed from Spain to go to China, because that was basically his project, he thought, based on this map or a similar map, that it would take him 2 to 3 weeks and he would just arrive. People before had stopped. He wouldn't stop, but the map made him certain that something would be there. It was clearly a mistake based on how large he thought the equator was in kilometers. There were different measures of that. He chose the more conveniently short one that would allow him to propose this trip that would make him incredibly rich, because actually Columbus asked for conditions when he actually went to America that made him as rich as a prince. The risk from the point of view of the Spaniards were very slow, because most people thought he would just fail and die. And if he found something that nobody else would dare to find, well, maybe he deserved to be rich, which he was for a short while until a lawsuit took him down out of his riches. The basic point is that with Columbus, the world expands. And instead of saying the word of Columbus, we say the work of Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, because he gave the name to America. He identified these new lands as a new continent. And it is through this map, and so I'm leading you gradually in this expanding view of the world to maps of China that I will touch soon. It is to this map, a map of 1507 by Waldseemüller, that for the first time there is the name America here, actually for South America, and America from Amerigo Vespucci. In fact, the contributions of Vespucci were not so world-changing, but his name stuck. The name remained for America. And it is associated for the first time with America being a different part of the world, not just like an appendix of East Asia. Columbus, until the end of his life, kept hoping that he knew he landed in Hispaniola and Cuba, but he thought this island would just be few days away from Japan and the coast of China, and it just until the end of his life. Now, these changing images of the world also created kind of a division of the world into two parts. Basically, this division of the world in two hemispheres makes sense based actually on a specific law treaty, a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas, that made a dividing line between what the Portuguese had found and what the Spaniards had found. And so everything that basically Columbus found with America would go to the Spaniards, and everything that the Portuguese had found, because the Portuguese were actually trying to reach China through the Indian Ocean, going down to Africa and then into the Indian Ocean. And they arrived in China. They arrived in China basically around 1510, while for the Spaniards it took them much longer. And they made this treaty under the Pope at the time of international law, that this part would be, for the newly discovered part under Portuguese administration, this part would be under Spanish control. This created the need for the first really exploration of the world and the first really global vision of the world. So Magellan was a Portuguese, but went to work for Spain. He wanted to reach East Asia. That was the economic motivation for all these travels, especially the Spice Islands. And he did it with the idea not so much that he would travel in the world, as eventually his fleet did. He died during his trip. What he wanted to do and what he achieved was, and here this is a manuscript map that shows you the route of his travel. It was to go at the south of what we now call Latin America, go into the Pacific, reach roughly the Philippines, what now we would call the Philippines, with the idea that he would reach the Spice Island and go back. Because if he would have gone, after he died, his fleet has no other, were almost starved. The Pacific Ocean was unbelievably large. It was a completely disastrous travel, even though it proved that the world was one for the first time. I mean, round, and you could navigate it all. But it was a disastrous travel. After he died, they had no other solution that simply to try to go back to the route they knew. The Indian Ocean, Indian Ocean was known, even though the Portuguese control it and they might have basically captured them during the return trip. What Magellan wanted to do was actually to reach the Spice Island and then go back to America and then connect it to America. And that was something that took quite a while to achieve, but in 1521, really the world was the same world that now we know, basically, a world of the size of which we know, and it's now really global. At the same time, before we reach maps of China, for a while, the contours of the world became more and more clear. This is from 1561, the best map at the time. North America, South America, Africa, and Asia. But there was still not any clear idea of where China actually fit. You see, actually, this map ends here and starts again here, and there was no clear understanding if China and East Asia were connected to America directly or not, how that part fitted in the project. And part of this is because having this rivalry, the Spanish and the Portuguese would lie to each other about measures. And these maps that I show you, mostly these maps tell stories, and most of the time they are stories that reflect reality, but sometimes they manipulate reality. The Portuguese and the Spaniards would not agree on to whom the Spice Island belonged, because this half of the world that belonged to the Spaniards, this half of the world to the Portuguese, starts in the middle of the Atlantic, but goes to the other side of the world, actually in the Pacific. And so it's just a meridian that runs all around the sphere, and somehow is, for 50 years, it was debated if it was considering the Philippines or the Spice Islands belonged to the Spaniards or not. And if you look at the Portuguese map at the time, it tells one story. A Spanish map at the time tells another story. And this really was a big problem until something happened, until basically under Philip II, that gives the name to the Philippine island. So they were discovered roughly under his time, and he gave that name. Spain and Portugal become one empire. And then there is no need anymore to keep sources protected. Then basically all the maps of China that the Portuguese one way or another had known to a certain degree. They had a sea chart that showed the coast of China they didn't want to spread to the world. Suddenly, this protection was not there anymore. Suddenly, the Portuguese were part of Spain. They had no reason to resist anymore and no way to resist basically the spreading of knowledge. And this led to the first map of China that we know. So this map was published in 1584 in the first atlas. And this map has the name China. It's in Latin, so it says Chinae Nova Descriptio, new description, new map of China. It has the north here with the Great Wall. It has actually Canton and Macau here. It has Las Filipinas, the Philippine island. It has Japan here, Japan. So you can recognize it. And then here, Malacca is quite recognizable. Some parts are easy to recognize, some are not. The names are roughly the names that now we know with the different spelling, but Henan, Cantam, and then Shandong with X being pronounced Shi. So it's a map that gives an idea of China. At the same time, it's also a map that misrepresents China to a certain degree, but it's the first one in print. And then, roughly at the same time, and for me, very significant, because this is in the HKUST collection. So when you have a collection of maps of China that are printed, often you have maps like this one, we have it, but it's also a map that actually has been printed in thousands of copies. So it's a map from 500 years ago. It's a precious map, but it's not unique. And sometimes you have a map that, yes, it has been printed, but it exists, in this case, in 2 copies only. So one is in UST, and when I basically was in charge of this collection and I started doing research, I found out, oh, there is another copy. And this copy is in the Jesuit archives in Rome. Now, they just look like the coloring is different. This is simply because, I mean, after 500 years, something happens to the paper in different environments. But this is a map that is unique and just a few years published after the other one, but it's unique because it has very full information about all the provinces of China. It has information about the sources of the Yellow River. It has information about the Great Wall. It has information about Korea, saying, unlike other maps, we show it as a peninsula because it's a peninsula, it's not an island. And also for the Jesuits, very important, this map was printed by Jesuits in Rome, the first Jesuit church, which was opened in 1583 in Guangdong, in Zhaoqing. And this is the report in the Jesuit archive that contains the map and allows to date the map, because our map actually has no date, the printed one. But the other copy in the Jesuit archive is part of a letter, basically by this Jesuit Michele Ruggeri that writes. He writes about the Descriptio Imperii Sinarum, so the description of China, basically of the Empire of China. But it's a much larger report that says basically, today, if it would be a meeting of politicians, it would be our policy for East Asia. Okay, it was really like what we can do in Japan. Can we convert Japan? Can we convert the Philippines? Were the only one under actually Catholic control. No need. What we can do in China? What we will convert first? What about Korea, for example, that is on that map? This kind of unknown. Can we get there? Can we get there? Are they willing to become Christians? After all, this was the point of view of the Jesuits to do these maps. When you start enlarging from this Western map of China to really the meaning and the ways in which these Western map makers were operating, then you see that they were quite lucky, because when Columbus went to America, he just went to the Caribbean. Then Amerigo Vespucci, fine, he went to America. But it took them 50 years to figure out the main contours of America. They just had, initially they were just on the Atlantic part. Then they managed to get to Panama, a bit of the Pacific. Decades and decades of slow discovery. But they go to China, and they have printed atlases. And so this printed atlas in 1555, this is an edition of 58, well, it has a map of China in print, and you can buy it on the street. It's commercial publishing. And so this is how these maps were mostly produced. And at the same time, also because now we start to see more of a dialogue, really, between Chinese map makers and Western map makers for most of the other places that the Western were discovering. Now, discovery is a tricky term, okay? Who discovers whom? I mean, even in Native Americans, were they really waiting to be discovered or not? But on the other hand, much of this map making was a map making of discovery. There were no maps, and maps were made. But in China, it's really different. It was the merging of two traditions, a Chinese tradition of map making in print for centuries already, and a tradition of Western map making that actually started to be in print just 100 years before this all started in around 1450. But it was growing and growing. And this dialogue is really very well exemplified by this map by Matteo Ricci, who is an Italian Jesuit missionary who knows Chinese, who prints this map from woodblock prints in Beijing. It's a very large map. It's a very large map with America. For the first time on a map in Chinese, you have America here with the name Meiguo and so on. And then you have Africa, Europe, and Asia. And because basically the map was made by an Italian missionary based on Western maps of the world, but it was also addressed to a Chinese audience, specifically actually to the court. Matteo Ricci really hoped to reach the emperor with this map printed in Beijing. And so it's a map made by a European, but with a Chinese point of view. I mean, China is closer to the center of the map. The center of the map as such is basically the Pacific, okay? But China is very close to the center. That's the point of view. I mean, in a European map, America is to the left. But in a map of China, even printed now, well, America is to the right because China is at the center. So Ricci kept China at the center. The connection between these two traditional map making really it's ongoing. It's rare that we see a case like this one where we really know that this Chinese map was the model for this Western map. In fact, this is the only case we know. So this Western map was printed in London in 1625. It's inside a travel collection about China. The author of this travel collection, Purchas, says, there are so many maps of China. You saw one before that was at the top, not too recognizable. Which one is the right one? Well, an English captain in Indonesia got a map in Chinese, and I used that map in Chinese to create this map because, I mean, Chinese must know how China looks like in a map, okay, much more than this Westerner that all have their own theories. So, but it's a unique case where really we can put them side by side, and now I'm not spending enough time to make you completely convinced that this is the case, but there is no doubt the two maps. One is a source, the Chinese map is a source, and it was not published much before. It was published in Fujian in 1605, and it was copied 20 years later in London. It's part of this circulation of knowledge. Krakow. So Krakow is a city in Poland, the second most important city in Poland, but culturally the first one. And these are the accidents. I mean, for example, someone studied Jesuit maps of China and finds that this map that I showed you at the beginning, this map by Michele Ruggeri, actually really important map. And somebody in Europe will see HKUST. Where is HKUST? Why this super precious map is in HKUST? Because we bought it in the late 90s, okay? We bought it from a dealer in the late 90s. Now, this map ended up in Krakow. We don't know exactly how, but it's a printed map. That means there is more than one copy, okay? The copy that was used by Purchas was certainly another one. Generally, when you make a copy of the map, especially you print it, the original map will be discarded one way or another. You make notes on it. There is no map in England like this. Why in Krakow? Well, it seems that basically a mission from a Russian mission led by Polish nobles in 1700 basically went to Beijing, and someone brought back this map. The interesting question is why only in Krakow, because there is only one copy of this map. But basically for most of Chinese maps, they were not object of collecting in China the way that most Western maps are object of collecting. So the map that I showed you before, the first map of China by Ortelius, thousands of copies. That's a norm, 100,000 of copies of these beautiful maps, but they were preserved and they were printed in books. These maps instead very large. You see 170 for 200 centimeters, very large. So not equally easy to preserve. Basically, a map is easier to preserve if you have it in a book, and then you close the book, and the map is protected. If you put it on the wall, already not that easy that it will survive. But also a map to be used. This is a map that basically is going to tell you a lot of information about history and practical information that maybe if you are studying for state exam in China might want to have visualized in a short way. You use it, and then you discard it. Cheap objects, super cheap objects. In fact, all prints are cheap objects. Even the Dutch maps that we saw before, for example, this one, it's a beautiful map, but it's precious when it is inside a book, and instead when it is as such, it's not much of than the price of a poster that someone would pay now. Meaning, even people that would work in like handicrafts or wood, or really like workers, working class people, they could never afford a painting. It's mainly Dutch, we're talking about Dutch. We know how the prices of this map. So a day of work in the equivalent of a factory in 1600 in Amsterdam would give you enough money to buy this map. Okay, and then you could paste it on the wall. Probably you would want a map of the world or a map of the Netherlands if you're Dutch. But anyway, it decorates your apartment. That's why they were printed so many. This is a very famous map that was very influential because by this time, really, the Jesuits knew how China looked like. They were able to read Chinese atlases very well. This map was just the first map of a big book all about maps of China printed in Latin in Amsterdam. This is the last map of the collection now that I'm showing you before I transition to talk about the book. Okay, so this map is another very influential map. And unlike all the other maps that basically go back to look at Chinese maps and just translate them and adjusting them a bit, this map actually comes from a collaborative project where a Jesuit missionary collaborated with Manchu officials and surveyed the whole country. And that happened around 1710, 1720 under the Kanxi Emperor. And the Jesuits were so proud of this effort that they basically managed to get Chinese maps to Paris and have them translated into French and to show how the religious order was so fundamental to the understanding of the world. They were really engaged in something that was very different from the previous map. They were just copies. They were really engaging mapping the world, almost half of the world. If you look at this map, it goes really from Manchuria, here's Korea, all the provinces of China, up to in the Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, the Caspian Sea. I mean, really half of Asia. Now, this is really everything that I learned while I was taking care of the map collection. Sometimes I went to the Jesuit archives in Rome to understand more about the maps we had. But then I basically had the luck to be heading a research project with a donation by Miss Ko Pui-sun, that is a donor of the library and actually of quite a few Hong Kong universities, to write specifically a book that would cover every single Western map of China printed in Europe. And then we would have to have if you say everyone, then you need to have a date brackets, because I mean, certainly not up to today. I mean, now there would be tens of thousands of maps. So we start with 1584, which is the first map I show you. And we end with 1735, that is the last map I show you. So 150 years of maps. And initially, when I was thinking about, because I was the head of the special collection, I was approached. Initially, this donor gave us the funds to digitize all the maps we had. That happened 4 or 5 years before I started, now 10, 12 years ago, before I started being at the map collection. And in fact, I was hired to write a few description of maps when I was started working at the map collection. I was teaching history in another university as a visiting professor, and then suddenly they asked me, are you interested in writing description of a few maps because we just digitize them? I thought it's something part-time, it's something fun. I'd never done anything with maps, but these maps are very interesting. Maybe I will do like a coffee table book on maps, okay? The kind of thing you can do in a few months, but it looks gorgeous, okay? And then the surprise was that after I got in charge of this map collection, after 1 year, the project had finished, and the donor approached us again and said, what else can we do? I mean, we digitize them, fine. In fact, now many universities digitize the maps. It's not so unique only to digitize your maps. What else can we do? And I was thinking, what should be done with a collection like this? What could we do? Initially, I thought maybe I just look at one map, the first one I show you. And that there are so many unknown place names and details. Maybe we'd really work on this map, we figure out every single detail. But then I was trying to find ideas, and also found out that, for example, there is a series that is called Exploration Cartography, where, for example, every single map of Japan is described. Every single Western printed map of Japan is described roughly in the same time frame. So I basically thought, okay, maybe a book like this for China would be good, but maybe someone already wrote a book like this for China. And in the end, I asked the editor of the series, no, nobody has ever written anything like this for China. Even though maps for China are important, Western maps for China are often on the cover of books, even these old maps. But nobody had written something exhaustive about them, only about 1 or 2 single maps. And then when I discussed with the head of the donation department, he told me, yes, a book about all Western printed maps of China sounds much more interesting than spending 4 years on a single map, and maybe you don't even understand everything in that single map. In fact, after years of looking at that map that I showed you before, still don't understand most of it. Sometimes you really don't know where many of the place names come in a map. But instead, if you really have a thorough coverage of every map of China that at least you are able to put your hands on, then there are many patterns that start appearing. And so basically this is what I am going to spend most of the rest of the time about. And I listed all these issues, and I don't really have time to cover them all. Okay, so whatever makes you curious, ask me. I will go through a few issues now. This is the first. The fact that basically these maps are objects that are really, as it's used more and more now in cultural study, material objects. They are really specific prints on paper of a certain size, and if you just see them digitally, they kind of look all the same. But if you see them, and because I was the head of a section with some manpower, especially research student helpers, that they would just cut and paste all these 127 maps on a wall that is 10 meters long, all in the right size, all grouped by similarity. There is also a website. Now, for the website, I will not spend time on that, but actually you can just Google it and you will find it. And every single map of China covered in the book is on this website, so you can basically have a look. What I found out, and basically I found it out already on the wall, really, that these maps have been printed. For example, this is the first map that I show you, 1584. But then it gets reprinted. And this map is very identifiable because unlike most maps of China printed both in China and in Europe, where north is on top, this one edges west on top, unusual orientation. So anyone that has maps of China with this unusual orientation is copying this map. And this map is printed in 1584. It keeps being copied and reprinted until 1697, for 150 years. So these maps spread. And when you count them all, you can kind of see how the knowledge spreads across Europe and in different places. Initially, it's printed in Antwerp, then in many, many different places, Cologne, finally Venice. But clearly, already printing a map like this in 1700 means making a very cheap book with outdated information.
I have a question about the maps. I remember you said previously that some of them are obsolete, very quickly become obsolete, but they are still purchased. So do they still function as maps, or is it actually a decoration that someone puts on his wall somewhere at home? Or is that not anymore tell you give you any information about what the word looks like? It's just a
Yeah, this is basically the way you study most of these maps is by going back. So when I was showing you the Jesuit maps in the report that we don't know that much about, only to copy, it's a single sheet, okay? And actually it doesn't even tell you where it was printed because it was used in an official report. No need to get copyright. But most of the maps that, for example, here in this huge circle of maps that imitated this very important map, they are inside books. That's also how they are preserved. So there are books that are very large, like this one, like folio ones, and there are books that are super small, like roughly like this. And so, for example, the 1697 map here, it's inside a very small book, and it's actually kind of a geography primer for school kids. So we know it was used educationally, but clearly there was not much emphasis. You could say it's a kind of an icon for the country, but at the same time, it also will tell you some sometimes super obsolete information about the map that comes from the 1584 text at the back of that map, because knowledge really sometimes is just recycled and is still presented by teachers as relevant, in Venice in a small school in 1700. But generally, the only information that we have is really like we look at a book, and then the book has a structure, and then we know what they wanted to do with the book. If you look at a map in isolation, you don't know mostly how the user used it. Okay, when we have books, then there is a whole branch of studies of looking at marginal annotation on books, and so you see what readers thought. Mostly, readers don't really spend much time writing in maps at the bottom of maps. So, but luckily, because we have the books, we basically know what they were doing. Now, if you more things about basically what it meant to go through this book and which kind of objects are maps. So maps are material object in the sense that, especially the printed one, if I am just a school kid in that school that maybe is asked to copy that map, well, I copy that map, okay? I only need that source in the book, and then I copy the map. But if I want to create an object like this, which is pretty large, then basically I need a lot of resources. I need someone that is able to, well, first of all, get information from China firsthand to a certain degree and give me a good map of China. Then I need a cartographer in Europe that can translate it into a Western map. Then I need people that create work on copper, a big sheet of copper, like kilos, very expensive ones. And they are able to do a pleasant engraving, a negative image of that. And then there will be different people that are able, like, to draw the angels, okay? And then someone else that colors it. And one person is the person that obtains a map, another person is the person that originally made the map. So a map has many names often. Sometimes you see this map called as Ortelius map. He's the editor of the book, the first atlas that was printed in 1584. But sometimes it's called the Barbuda map because we know that the original Portuguese cartographer is Barbuda, and then someone else certainly engraved it. So this object have many fathers. They are hybrid authors. And sometimes you see it here. The other map that I show you, the 1735, the one in France based on the survey, 2 edition. And here, anyway, tell you this ink, in, and sculp. They use Latin, even when the map is French. In stands for invenit, basically he created, kind of design creator, okay? And the sculpsit or fecit are basically the engravers. So, and often they have names, especially for the highly decorated parts. Or here also you have it. You have the names. It was a copy that was made in the Netherlands very soon after they found that this French map was selling extremely well, and then they made a knockoff copy in Amsterdam because when you cross borders, copyright doesn't count at the time. So I'm showing you here 2 cases of maps that I cover in this book. Basically, when I tell you, I talk about 127 maps. These 127 maps are 127 copper plates. So they were created on copper. But copper was expensive at the time, and manpower was expensive at the time. So often they would create a map, and then they would just add things on the same copper plate. When they make changes on the same copper plate, from the point of view of describing maps in a book like this systematically, we think of them as the same map, but we call the initial condition state 1, and if there is a change, there will be state 2. Sometimes they do 3 or 4 changes. And here I give you an example where actually there is quite a bit of a change. I mean, the map is not very large. It's a map of China, and so after 9 years, they got news that basically Dutch explorer had actually went to Korea and found out it's not an island. Okay. In fact, you saw it even in the first map that they said it was not an island, but the geographical information is not very straightforward. So once more, they thought it was an island, and they just corrected. Someone scraped this part on the copper plate with a spatula or in a way that, and then it connects it, and then it becomes a peninsula. And also so many more place names everywhere. If you compare the two, it's the same map. Someone else really filled in the blank space with more information. This actually generally doesn't happen that often. Okay, what happens often is you lazily recycle information, at the most say super new map, and there is no change whatsoever. But sometimes it happens. The other extreme is this one. Because again, when I tell you this kind of number, that for me it has become very meaningful because I spent 5 years on this project. So when I count the maps, 127, it's like, for me, it's kind of a magical number. And always thinking, when will people start finding other maps? Okay, and then they say, okay, they are not 127, they are whatever they are, 130, 140, 150. And then, but you still need to count them. And how do you count them? Sometimes they look identical. Okay, these maps are basically identical information. But each one was recreated with a different copper plate. And how do you tell? Sometimes you just tell by looking at the very small differences. So these 2 maps created few months, one after the other, and just because it was a very small book. It was the fact that the Qing had invaded China, and it was a report by a Jesuit, Martino Martini, about that. A bestseller. Just 2 minutes and I finish. Everyone wanted to reprint the map. Super small, super easy to do. But at the same time, they are different because the technology at the time of copperplate didn't allow to do a complete replica of an original map. Now with 3D printing or something, then you have a complete replica. But here, and so that's how you judge. I mean, if you have, for example, a line crossing Hangzhou, it's separate N from G here, and it goes in the middle of the 8 here. It's a bit like a spot the difference game, okay? But then by this game of spotting the difference in high definition images most of the time, you are sure that this map actually had a very specific spread across Europe. So it's not the information didn't change, but the spread, you can trace it by being able to know that these are all different maps and someone else really created them. I had discoveries in the archive also about maps, some manuscript maps that basically then became the origins of prints. So this is part of writing this book, or even myself, I'm telling me that my time is over. And basically, I'm just ending by saying that we also acquired a lot of maps, okay, a lot of new maps. The funds for this book were not only funds for the book, for me to go to Europe for months, acquire images, print the book, but we also acquired a very large amount of maps. And in this case, we decided not Western maps anymore. We got Ming and Qin dynasty Chinese maps. And these maps are exhibited in the HKUST library now. So you can see them. You can also get an idea of what is in the exhibition by looking at the website. And they will be available until June. Many thanks.
Well, really, many thanks for the fascinating talk on the fruition of a 5-year project, isn't it? And I want to mention that what is most fascinating, especially for me, is the human element in the maps and also the intercultural element. And for those who would like to learn more about the Ritchie map, actually downstairs at our Dunhuang exhibition, we're very actually grateful for Marcos giving us permission to use the Ritchie map of 1602. And if you want to find out more and would want to check out this book, is in our center, the Chinese Research Center. Do drop by and you can check out this huge tome.
Really
very heavy, very heavy. And I want to also mention really this exhibition and this collection of rare maps. A lot of people in Hong Kong didn't realize we have such treasures right here in Hong Kong, and they're hosted in HKUST. Krakow is slightly more famous than HKUST, I must say. But I think HKUST is famous thanks to this collection and also the work of Marco and his team. So let us take a few questions from the audience, and this is an opportunity for some of you may want to ask some questions. And we may have some questions from the internet? No? All right.
I really want to say that clearly, even I started this with no knowledge whatsoever about maps. That's a knowledge about history, curiosity. You can ask really any question about these maps. I mean, in the sense that there is no wrong question whatsoever. Yeah.
Yes, one question.
I can only echo the introduction and the observations earlier. What struck me is that dynamic between the Portuguese and the Spanish when it came to cartography, and this is where you see that the dynamic between cultures in the maps. I was curious, have you seen something similar in the Chinese maps as well?
You mean different styles or similar in which sense?
In the way that, say, one province in China would portray the maps in one way, but another province in China would portray the maps in a different way to gain some kind of advantage, for example?
Well, I mean, Europe was really a divided continent, and these countries were at war with each other. Okay? And that's really the big difference with China. And they also had, I mean, they had a universal language in the sense of most of these maps are in Latin. And it would actually, I mean, the reason why all these maps are printed in the Netherlands is that initially initially they were printed in Belgium, in Antwerp. The first map I showed you printed in Antwerp. But then the Low Countries, as they were called them at the time, Belgium didn't exist. Well, basically went to war with Spain for independence. Okay, and that's why Amsterdam became a safer place. At the same time, the Dutch kept selling maps to Spain and all Catholic countries in Europe with which they were at war over the Golden Age. So even Europe was more unified than it seems. I mean, actually, all these maps printed in the Netherlands are only understandable with the European-wide market of countries at war with each other. But China is different in this sense. So I can give you only a couple of examples that gives you a sense. Now, where are my Chinese maps? I showed 2 Chinese maps before. Okay, so roughly what we know here is that Nanjing was a center for relatively luxury items, let's put it like this. This actually was a fairly large format atlas, and it was an atlas with a map for all of China, and then each province would have a map, and there was a very extensive text. The center for cheap items was Fujian. In Fujian, they would print, generally maps are not very different from prints in general. So in Nanjing and Suzhou, they were printing luxury books and luxury maps. In Fujian, cheap books and cheap maps. I mean, it's a bit of a generalization, but most of the cheap maps and most of the maps we had come from Fujian because they were cheap, but they don't have a Fujian point of view. Okay, they really don't. They don't seem to, nobody in China seemed to have had an agenda at that time about portraying, having one image of China rather than another. There was also not the issue that so many maps of Europe have at the time of borders, okay, showing borders. Yeah, there were borders between Chinese provinces, but there were administrative borders. Like you would not fight to map Hong Kong district in one way or another. It's an administrative reality. And in fact, it's quite striking that in most of the Chinese maps that we see, there are no external borders, but the internal borders are very clear between the provinces because it was a big deal. It was a big deal how the administration worked, but it was agreed upon. So the thing that happened when maps like these started being printed in China, because these are Chinese maps as well, they started creating a different style. I mean, meaning a map like this is a map with meridian and parallels under the Western format. It's a map of the world, including America and so on. And the map that I was showing you here is actually a grid, but the grid is not meridian and parallel. It's just uniform distance grid. And they're not maps of the world, okay? They're just maps of all of China. And so these two styles of making maps of China and maps of the world of this kind remained. The Jesuit maps remained a minority style of making maps. There is a lot of text that you don't see here, but it's really like there are big chunk of text where different Chinese scholars give their opinion. They say why the map made by Ricci, with whom we have collaborated to create this gigantic map, is superior. There is information about astronomy. Here at the side, in fact, you see a part of basically the skies. There is a whole theory. But this whole theory remained a minority theory. Remained a theory that if you really are into new learning, Western-style learning, yes, you want to go into that. But if you just want a map basically to understand how China is, you use this one, okay? A map like this that would have a lot of text province by province telling you basically the main population, distances, historical information in a compact way that is familiar. Because as it was for that map that I showed you that they kept reprinting after 100 years, even for Chinese, people are quite comfortable with the mode of presentation that is just, again, reassuring, same information. The Jesuit vision of the world was quite shocking at the beginning because, I mean, what is this, America suddenly? Well, half of the world, we don't even know it existed. And anyway, China in a completely different position in the world compared to how Chinese maps show it. And so there were some debates, but actually not super long and influential, most of them. But they existed, they coexisted. So, and then there are also Buddhist maps that were created in China at the time.
Yes. If I could add to that, the questions that was raised, we have to bear in mind there's certainly diversity among the Chinese maps. The presentation of today focused on the European maps of China, but the Chinese themselves also have a tradition. So actually, Professor Wang Qianjin is the expert on this, and it's surprising actually. You can look at this map, the intercultural element, in the sense that how, for example, the Ritchie map used the Chinese materials. And the Chinese materials, the Chinese map later on used the European materials. So there were actually a lot of things going on. And we have to bear in mind why maps were created in the first place. So there are different motives. And in the morning, actually, we have a workshop just among a few of the scholars, including Professor Simmons here and Dr. Huang. We all look at a few of us all look at the Selden map. The Selden map is, would you call it a Chinese map? It's created by Chinese, but it has a very different intention. It was used for navigational purpose, and it does not have China in the middle. It's created by Chinese nonetheless, but it has Southeast Asia sort of in the center because that's the maritime, well, if you call it the maritime Silk Road, that connection.
Yeah, so this is one of the sections of the exhibition we had where we compared this map to the Southern map, which is here. So this is the image of the map you were talking about. It's a manuscript map that actually roughly has the same outline of China and Southeast Asia than the map I showed you before, side by side. So clearly someone is getting from Europe is getting information from China, some from China is getting information from Europe, and they're creating mixed products.
Well, it's surprising. I mean, so much you can read from maps. I mean, they tell you actually the life of the people and the economy, the politics and religions and everything. Do you have another question from the audience?
Regarding the Chinese maps, was North always the top for Chinese maps as well? And I guess that kind of leads into a broader question about before they mixed, as they were kind of going it themselves. Maybe there was some mixing way further back that as they were going themselves and making their maps in their different cultures. Were there any sort of parallels that sort of out of the nature of it, even though they weren't talking, were the same, or were there surprising things that were different about maps made in the different cultures?
From comparative perspective, yes.
Well, let's see if I can find a map online that also can help answer this. But the North is generally on top for both Western maps and Chinese maps, even more for Chinese maps, in fact, of large areas, okay? Because if you have a smaller area, then it's very different. If you have a map of the coast, for example, it will be either with the sea on top or the sea at the bottom. Doesn't matter, even if the orientation should be east-west or something. But if you have a large area like all of China or even all of Shandong, yeah, the default is north on top. And generally, our maps also have north on top. The European maps, but not necessarily either. I mean, in terms of similarity, where let me see if I find this easily and I can show you this one. No, this is as famous as the Selden map for people who study Chinese maps. Is this map that is called Daming Hongyi Tu. So it's like the mixed or combined maps of the Great Ming. Tu is illustration. This is the Great Ming, and this is kind of the combined map. It's a very large map. It's in the archives in Beijing. All the stickers in white are because this map was created at the very beginning of the Ming Dynasty, 1391. 1 minute left, yeah. But it was used until the Manchu Dynasty, so they use white stickers in Manchu to keep reading the map after 300 years. And because it was basically created at the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, but based on a Mongol map of the Yuan Dynasty, they combined information coming from the Arabs that gave them the tip of Africa here. This is a Nile River. Whether it's really the tip of Africa or not is debated because nobody had gone there yet at the time. But anyway, this is Africa. This is Europe. You don't recognize it until you really magnify much. But this is an example of interaction in maps. In fact, the title says so. It's a syncretic, it's a combined map. And especially at the time of the Mongol Empire, there was this dialogue. But Western maps went in print much later than Chinese maps, so they started much later in actively having people doing printed maps and coming to China. The dialogue was there. I don't see very big differences. I mean, obviously, it also depends what you want to emphasize. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, Chinese maps are more pictorial, okay, more like landscape paintings, and Western maps are not. But it seems to be quite superficial just to see it that way. It's easier to me to see areas of similarity than striking differences in the two traditions.
Well, thank you. Very short question, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard about some discussion about some older maps show some places that even before some people discovered, like the map showing America before Columbus there, or even the map showing like Australia or some other places. So what's about this discussion?
Yes. So in the exhibition, so they are basically based on different interpretation of this map. Okay, so this map basically, by any account, was created by Materici in Beijing based on Western maps, incorporating some information about China, and you can kind of see the original Western map that was used for that. But then there are claims by China. I feel a bit of resistance in calling them Chinese scholars. It's more like Chinese writers that just claim that no, actually there is much of the information that is on this map doesn't come from Western maps. It comes from Chinese maps. Ricci got it when he was in China. Now, there is a section actually in the exhibition in which I portray, this is connected to a very specific map, and there is a book that talks about like the mysteries of the Ricci map and talks about a specific map, quite small, that supposedly was created in 1400, and it's connected with Zheng He. Okay, Zheng He is the great explorer, the eunuch that went to Asia and Africa. And I had a small section in the exhibition that contextualizes that map. And we had a small symposium in USD when we launched the exhibition. And then I had Chinese scholars, map scholars, that look at me and say, why are you showing that map? I mean, what's the purpose of showing that map? I mean, that map is just like garbage. Well, in the sense that basically you cannot find a single scholar that is not just about being mainstream or no mainstream, but inside academia doing map studies. The consensus is 100% that map, that this argument is based on a faulty original map. Okay, so the map is basically fake. But clearly at the margin, there is a constant reproposing of this argument. Now, I would basically say that it might sound reductive, just say, okay, this map is bad. It's simply that you need to look at it attentively, okay? A lot of the text in this supposed map that shows that Zheng He discovered America is super late. Instead, it's a map created during the Ming Dynasty, but Qing is written there, something that would be completely impossible because, I mean, it's after centuries. And especially, the paper doesn't look right. Nobody look at the paper. There are all the hallmarks of basically, I mean, it's really a big problem with maps that they can be fake. Okay, they can be fake, especially the manuscript ones. Because the printed ones are inside books. They've been inside books for centuries. You cannot suddenly start flooding hundreds of books with fake maps now. But for a single manuscript map, you can. You can create it, but then you should make it available. You should make it available for everyone to say, okay, we test the paper, we test the ink. It doesn't even pass the text of reading the map. I mean, really, read the map. So I would say I could point you to at least one good study by Western scholars and one good study by Chinese scholars that would go over the argument and really show why that specific map is not correct.
There are also sensational claims everywhere. But if you want to see the real thing, go to HKUST and check out the Ritchie map. It's a stunning screen, actually. It's huge and it's colored. But with that, let us have a round of applause to thank Dr. Caboara for the wonderful talk. And we'll just take the opportunity to present a token of appreciation. And take a picture.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
Here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. So just a reminder, our next lecture on the Dunhuang series is going to be in February 28th by Ms. Li Mei-yin on viewing the life in ancient times through the Dunhuang murals. 从敦煌壁画看古人生活 is going to be a fascinating topic. Okay, thank you very much once again. Goodbye.